Hit it. Good evening and welcome to the After Hours show with the Autonomous Collective. I'm Joe in Norway, and I'm joined by Ann Lee, a retired college professor and community member at the Daily Kos. She's a member of the National Council of Independent Scholars and is a contributor to the book, The Political Economy of Art, Making the Nation of Culture. Evening, Ann.
Hey there. Hope
Hi
you had a
there.
good week.
A little busy, a little cold. We had a birthday to do earlier today, so I'm a little knackered, as the lane might
That was
say.
one good-looking cake, though. That really was.
Have to use our wild berry jam in between the chocolate layers. So another week. Just to touch on Israel-Palestine ceasefire has been broken. The bombing, concentration of the bombing has focused on the south. Many deaths. Unconscionable where it's going, right in our faces. Number of things happened in the U.S. this week, namely, well, actually today at the United Nations. Of course, in lockstep, again, predictable, the U.S. vetoed a United Nations resolution demanding an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza.
Figures.
Surprising?
Not surprising.
So the vote came as Secretary General Antonio Guterres, for the first time, invoked Article 99 of the UN Charter, which enables a UN chief to raise threats he sees to international peace and security. He warned of a humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza, which has been obvious. The U.S. ambassador, Robert Wood, said halting military action would allow Hamas to continue to rule Gaza and only plant the seeds for the next war. That on its face is profound, that they can't do the simple mathematics of bombing the civilian population as sowing the seeds for the future engagements. Horrendous.
It's historic in that sense.
We haven't seen anything like this since when? Chechnya? Was Chechnya this?
Chechnya had carpet bombing. Well, yeah, that's the last bit of heavy-duty carpet bombing.
This is a whole people being potentially wiped out, or significantly,
Ethnically cleansed, let's put it euphemistically.
They're bombing, even the Rafah border was bombed today, which is where I assume they're forcing people towards, they told people to flee to the south, and then they told people once they're in the south that Khan Yunis was now a war zone and that they need to go to Rafah. So it's progressively getting closer and closer to pen them towards the Egyptian border.
There are twice as many people in Rafah as it should have. In other words, it's overcapacity. You're going to have, 500,000 people in a space for 300,000 or so.
Shocking. Another ridiculous turn of events is the House of Representatives voted on making anti-Zionism equivalent to anti-Semitism.
Yeah, House Resolution 894, to which about 90 Democrats voted present. My congressperson voted yes, which I found problematic in a lot of ways, and I sent them a note on that.
So that makes the millions of people in the U.S. who are voicing criticism, any criticism of the Israeli state or Zionism itself, as anti-Semitic. But that's understandable, I guess, from these boneheads, that they would do something like this, but they wouldn't have, or they would be so profoundly lacking in historical understanding and facts of reality.
Americans
The
don't
ultra-Orthodox community has tens of thousands of anti-Zionists. They were one of the earliest anti-Zionists who didn't believe and don't believe in the foundation of the Israeli state. They're waiting for the Mashiach to come back.
Indeed. Well, it's a complicated set of motives to try and collapse these two definitions.
Last week as well, there was some shocking reporting from 972, Israeli Palestinian magazine, doing good journalism. They reported on the effects of the use of artificial intelligence in the Israeli military to assist in targeting, and that the system is generating more targets than they're able to engage. Israel's military today said carried out strikes on about 450 targets in the past day, highest number reported since the end of the truce with Hamas a week ago. Also, the Israeli flag was raised in the middle of the symbolic Palestine Square in Gaza City. Did you happen to read the reporting from 972?
No, I'm sorry I didn't, but the mainstream media is talking a lot about the whether how much the Israeli government knew, and also the delay. It's 8 hours of delay in response time to the initial attack.
Well, enough of all of that. I'll post some links to that in the chat for later. But I thought we'd get back to the Middle East after that discussion with a very traditional, super popular beverage / dessert called sahleb, which is a tuber from an orchid. It's from the orchid genus Orchis, including the species Orchis muscula and Orchis militaris. Maybe Nancy's familiar with those. They're getting harvested to near extinction in Iran and Turkey, but so it's hard to get a hold of. It's maybe not as rare as saffron. Well, I guess it is sort of like saffron. Um, I obtained a little bit from our Syrian grocery store, but typically what people do is use, instead of the orchid flour, they use cornstarch or a blend of what I've got here is glutinous rice flour and a little bit of cornstarch. So they're thickening agents. It's basically a starch that you make with milk. So we're going to stir these together with sugar, rose water. Oh, I'm missing something. No, I'm not. A special flavor of mastic, which is like a pine resin, gives a unique piney taste. We'll garnish it with chopped dried apricots and pistachios and a sprinkle of cinnamon. So the last time I had this was in Jerusalem about 25 years ago, and the vendors, I don't know if Kelly could throw up, or James, whoever has the photo of a vendor. This was an Albanian vendor from the turn of last century. And they walk around with these metal canisters. The one in Jerusalem that I had it was strapped to his back like a backpack, and it had a hook for the spigot that goes over the shoulder. He tilts it, and out pours a somewhat gelatinous substance into a cup. It's wonderful in the winter. It's a warming drink. It's kind of like hot chocolate is to European and American Western culture. Sahleb is to the Middle East. They typically have it in the winter to warm you up. And it's essentially a custard without eggs. So it's usually milk and the starch, and you cook that until it thickens to however thick you want it. So you can either have it very thick or thin in a drinkable form. And one of the things that I was struck by when I first tasted it was kind of shocking because it had the consistency and texture of semen, shall we say? And I don't know if it's back into Roman times, they've had all types of drinks from the orchid and all sorts of aphrodisiacs. And I'm wondering, is the texture and the consistency some relation to male semen? And I was curious to learn that the sahleb is derived from basically somewhat meaning literally fox's testicles. So I don't know where we want to go with that, but it is an unusual texture to enjoy, and it also has the same sort of color, opaque white. I hope I've turned everybody on to, again, like last week was the Kissinger meal of bitterness. Piping hot glass of sahed. So I'll get going on this if you wanted to fill us in on what's happening in Ukraine and Russia.
Okie. Well, it's been another tough week. The first image of this is sort of where we've had some major strikes from U.S. supplied munitions, but overall the week has been very strange. I think if you consider that that the Ukrainians are, some people will admit to the idea of a stalemate, but there's a variety of ways in which you can think about it. And this is a week where Putin decided that he would declare his candidacy for re-election, which would mean ultimately that he's spent over 20 years in his position here and there, and means that electorally we wouldn't be rid of him, so to speak, until 2030. So pretty much he's been a dictator for life. So that was how this week has come up in terms of that. There's been controversy about about the volume of casualties. It sort of tilted upwards during the week. The same spots pretty much are the ones that have been emphasized. You'll see on the lower left that there's been some concentration at the crossing at Kherson, and the Ukrainians still hold part of the left bank, the lower part there, previously held by the occupiers. But needless to say, other things are going on. The Russian Duma may consider I suppose it's legislation or a declaration, the Sea of Azov, which is the body of water below this red spot here, the red portion here. The Sea of Azov, originally, of course, Ukraine bordered it, but since it's been occupied, the Russians will go ahead and declare it an interior body of water to Russia. So that's moving along. It is this idea of he who makes the maps wins in that context. So the week has been sort of interesting from that point of view. The wealth of the richest Russians has increased by 38 billion from the beginning of the year, according to Bloomberg. So there's the usual propaganda and disinformation that's been flying back and forth. Fortunately, there's a lot of good open source materials available, and I hope that people will be more aware that there are those differences in what's being told to people, as well as the kind of underlying realities that go on. Avdiivka is still a spot that is being contested. It is an industrial area, so like Mariupol, it is trying to move from building to building in an industrial factory area. Originally, we were talking about the slag heap, which is on the eastern side of the coke plant. And there's a huge rail yard in there, and it all sounds all very industrial, but that's what's being fought over. And so it goes back and forth relative to sending essentially ethnic minority troops and prisoners into a kind of meat grinder. There's plenty of people being blown up and shot, and of course the usual side stories. And there is artillery attacks on both sides. Lots of artillery being shown, also drone strikes, a variety of interesting drone strikes. Several units of on both sides are getting better at using a drone where you drop essentially a mortar round into things. Like they had a mortar round go into two Russian soldiers hiding in an already destroyed tank, which the turret had already blown out. And I think that they thought they were safer inside the wreckage, but the drone just dropped a mortar round right into the opening. Anyway, they're getting better at doing this. It's just a skill level is stepping up. So that's the major area. It's by no means an encirclement. There's it's a lot of infrastructure in there. And as they say, if you look at the map a little bit, that it is on the sort of gateway to Donetsk. And as I've mentioned before, we're almost at the edge where they're taking back area that they gave up, that the Ukrainians gave up in 2014. So it's not as dire and it's not as purely stalemated. I think that the Ukrainians will have it actually admitted a kind of stalemate, but stalemate assumes nothing is moving. There's battles every day, and there's advances in small places, and it goes back and forth. The Russians still are taking more casualties, but they also, brag about new targets to enlist, and the claim is that they've added something like, or the goal is to add another 170,000 troops during this coming year. There's snow on the ground, not quite frozen yet, but that's kind of what the battle area looks like. Other things that have happened this week are discussions about American money that's going to the Ukrainians. Republicans are holding up the money, trying to leverage it against funds to reinforce the southern U.S. border, because this is an election issue. It's a trope that they're trying to push for the coming year, claiming that there is this tide that is rolling over the border. It's really not, and most of the effort along the border is casual effort, which is more about drug interdiction and a variety of other kinds of things. It is a porous border, our southern border, regardless of people who want to build walls, etc. It's not about walls, and that's kind of the misperception. There's traffic going back and forth through the border every damn day, and any holes in the border are really quite complicated, considering how far you have to travel, and are fairly well policed, actually, considering the funding. So that's kind of what has been going on. The Avdiivka area continues to be contested, and as we move forward, I've included an image of war crimes, potential war crimes, to Ukrainian soldiers surrendered to Russians who promptly shoot them to death, all in view of a Ukrainian drone. A Su-24 fighter bomber, I guess it's a bomber, got shot west of Odessa near Snake Island. It's a fairly big bomber. It's the kind that released multiple cruise missiles. So it is, they've lost another airplane. The Ukrainians did not seem to lose aircraft this week, which was a good thing. U.S. military aid, as I think you could see in the chart, goes up and down, and it's the European Union still outpaces America in terms of this, and further down you can see that any kind of monies that are being transferred to Ukraine are really not about money. It's not about cash. It's really about investment in the military industrial complex in the United States. So it, in effect, is transfers of materiel that needs to be replenished or replaced in a lot of different places in the United States. And so there is an obligation that is built into this. And you can see what goes on in both direct industrial investments and industrial base impacts. So making an effort to supply aid is really about a fiscal policy meant to build the American economy. And in fact, the American economy is doing okay. That new jobs are in place, at least from a data point of view, and any hint of recession seems to have receded in a variety of ways. So interest rates are not going to need to rise. So there's one can be actually optimistic, and it's a selling point relative to the coming election. Needless to say, it didn't alter the clown show of the GOP debate this week, but it was interesting to simply have some major candidates make some very strange comments or gaffes, like Ron DeSantis talking about the traditional Arab clothing as men dresses, So it was odd, if nothing else.
Is that what he actually said?
Yes, men dresses. He talked about Al Qaeda wearing men dresses, whatever that means. Um, so the mainstream media did not press that far enough. So those of us in the more independent media are just trying to
Uh,
make hay from it.
I guess they're just thankful that he didn't say some other more racy language.
Oh, well, he's just a moron. The man is a moron. But anyway, uh, monthly documented Russian losses have gone up. 11,000 people died. Thousands of vehicles and materiel have been destroyed. Um, the less captures that have occurred within that particular context. It's been a busy week though, despite the fact that lines are settling simply because of the weather. There were a couple of random assassinations this week, some within the combat area, but a couple of curious ones in Russia. A pro-Russian Ukrainian legislator was assassinated somewhere near Moscow this week, and it seems pretty clear that the Ukrainian intelligence services were behind that. So there's a variety of other things are going on, reminding us, of course, of last week's sabotage on the main rail line from the east to the west in Russia. A fuel and iron ore train was sabotaged while it was in a tunnel. So not much new news about that particular event, but it did slow materiel traffic moving from east to west. Other discussions are essentially about munitions, about whether they're going to be manufactured in or outside Ukraine, whether their replacements are moving back and forth. There is, of course, the usual lags in information, continuing drone strikes across the border, deeper into Ukraine from Crimea primarily. And so there's a lot of back and forth relative to drone warfare. Not much on the ocean, on the Black Sea front, with any kind of drones or shipping, at least at this particular moment. We'll see how that changes in the future. One of the nice things about having open source is that you can actually track how intelligence and surveillance and reconnaissance gathering goes. You can actually follow the track of large American jet-powered drones that don't go into the battle space, but essentially loiter over Moldova, which I suppose can be a thing. Otherwise, the continuing saga of stories in the Baltic about the various Baltic states commenting on how much their resolve is relative to trying to resist Russian expansion, and the usual disinformation campaigns of that go on online relative to these small atrocities as well as big atrocities in variety of strikes against crowds and civilian targets continue. Ukrainians do not try to strike, generally do not strike civilian targets, so that's a whole different thing. How are we doing on cooking there, Joe?
We're just about finished here.
Excellent. I'm hungry again, darn it.
Oh, you can. So I've put ground mastic, the pine resin, sugar, rose water, cornstarch, a little bit of rice flour, in this case, glutinous rice flour, and makes it a little bit more funky. And the orchid sahleb starch. And I used oat milk today. So we had lying around. Otherwise, the traditional way to make this with cow's milk, and you can serve it at this texture, or you can let it get a little thicker or plumpier, however you like it. I think we could heat up a little bit, keep it a little thicker, and then serve it. Rose water is really nice. Love that.
Rose water's not that expensive, is it, Joe?
Depends on where you live, but quite affordable.
Really appreciate your challenge to the American palate.
It's the texture that's challenging for people, I think.
Well, liquid yogurt is more widely consumed these days, which is a good thing. Although we do worry about things like chopped cantaloupe, which has so far killed 5 people.
Oh, this is the pre-cut.
Yes. Yeah, pre-cut cantaloupe. I don't know why people are buying pre-cut cantaloupe, but for some reason there are at least 2 brands of pre-cut cantaloupe that have killed people.
Well, when you're on your way to the park, the city park, to have a picnic with friends, just want to grab something quick
and die.
I usually pack a knife. So traditional way, you can do various toppings, but basically I do cinnamon and I love, these are some dried apricots from Iran. Yeah, I love Iranian dried fruits. They have a very special technique. I think it's basically they add salt. You get a kind of gelatinous, crunchy, chewy, rosy, cinnamony, very special dish.
Yum.
You can also serve it with the cinnamon stick to stir, or a spoon, depending on the. So that's sahleb.
Nice.
You go out and try it. It's basically some kind of milk, cornstarch, sugar, and rose water. Among other things. Very straightforward. Instead of hot chocolate, try that. And I hear you have something to rant about.
Oh, geez. Well, it's been that kind of week. The next little image that you'll get to see is a picture of college presidents. It is a strange event that occurred this week where the House subcommittee on education and the workforce decided that they would quiz certain presidents to answer for rampant anti-Semitism engulfing campuses, their specific campuses, that is Harvard, UPenn, and MIT, and some local DC campuses like George Washington American. Those are easy to invite. But what's curious, and this is Elise Stefanik's sort of work, she's kind of the motive force because she's third in leadership in the GOP and is on this committee. Virginia Fox is the committee chair, It's just interesting how kind of petty the whole operation is. When you go to their website, you see that they have pictures of all the Republican members of the committee, and they don't show pictures of the Democratic Party members. They just list their names. It's quite amusing to me to see the kind of weird pettiness that they display. So, in keeping with that, for some reason, there seem to be no male university presidents at elite institutions in the United States, which is totally false, but it is quite amusing. And it seemed relatively deliberate. Elise is a Harvard alum, but anyway, it was a chance to make a little hay. UPenn, I think, was chosen because President Biden does have some connection to UPenn. He's spent time as a professor there and has a center on campus, et cetera. And so you can think of this as a kind of another election deal, and is to make a little hay about wokeness, a kind of anti-woke attention to what apparently seems like all this diversity. And it is also a comment on Gen Z, and there was a series of New York Times articles that, we're coming up on an election season, and the New York Times does have a kind of weird way of humanizing or personalizing its reporting. So they decided to quote a student that the mood of the campus these days is not pro-Palestinian, it's anti-Semitic. Now, to try and collapse these two ideas together is really inappropriate, if anything, and oversimplifying the case. Similarly, anti-Semitic and anti-Zionist, the House Resolution 894, it is just odd, but my assumption is that they're trying to bring back the oldies but goodies, the classic tropes, going back literally to the 60s and 70s. None of you will recall, but Ronald Reagan, when he was governor of California, referred to campus violence as he was threatening or warning demonstrators that his calling out the National Guard, et cetera, would result in a bloodbath. And this is a response to potential campus violence. Now, if you tie this into what they were doing in 2017 and 2019, Republican groups were trying to provoke violence on campus by having student groups, young Republicans, et cetera, on campus Republicans, invite controversial characters and force public institutions to spend more taxpayer dollars on security. Several campuses, it cost them, millions of dollars in campus security upgrades, or, places like the University of California had to bring in additional cops from other campuses and had to pay for support from regional sheriffs and the state highway patrol. So these events were meant not simply to cause trouble, but also to drain the reserves of campus security and the public coffers. Now, what's curious, of course, about this little event was Elise decided to put the University of Pennsylvania president on the spot and tried to challenge her in a way that, private institutions, large universities, while having public spaces, also have questions of how much speech control they have over a private property, really no different than a shopping mall. And the problem, of course, is how to ensure that speech is protected on the one hand, but also avoid instances of bias or prejudice. And my supposition is that they're trying to ratchet up the conflict so that in an election year, we get some instances of campus violence, more specifically at private institutions. And the hope here is, of course, that elite private institutions might have this sort of thing so that the simple protest against attacks on Palestinians can be contrived or framed in a media context as being anti-Semitic. And so essentially that's the trope that is being pushed in a Republican organized committee of the House by GOP leadership. So that's the kind of direction that things are heading, confabulating anti-Semitism with anti-Zionism and ethnic cleansing with genocide. So if you just make it all one thing, then it on the one hand it makes the message tighter. On the other hand, the nuance is very problematic because not all ethnic cleansing is not all genocide, and similarly, anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism are not identical and problematic in a whole bunch of historical ways. But moral clarity gets short shrift when conservative elements politicize protected speech, especially when carefully assembling such panels. And there wasn't a public higher education institution included because this is the difference than a large public institution, UPenn as opposed to Penn State. And so targets were carefully chosen, not unlike Hunter Biden offered to talk to the House Oversight Committee or whatever, and they refused because they didn't have the opportunity to manipulate the message in a closed session. But he called their bluff in that sense. All that was before the Hunter Biden's indictment on not what one would consider trivial, then potentially criminal tax evasion charges in California this week, which now to invite him to the House to talk in a public session, he would have to plead the Fifth Amendment in Fifth Amendment protections in that particular context. But before, whatever. Anyway, welcome to election season. There are, of course, renewed calls for a kind of speech discipline, but I think where the GOP wants to go this coming year is to get us into a kind of hate speech that in a former litigation was called fighting words. So we may see a return to the fighting words doctrine, which the problem, of course, here's a simple example that some people feel like they're being attacked when someone chants about the intifada or uttering jihad. And these things mean something relative to a media message, but they aren't the actual translation of the words. So their use is abstracted in that particular context. Language does have context, and these presidents of major universities, private universities, did respond in the kind of lawyerly way that they should. The president of UPenn is a free speech advocate. So this is a interesting kind of problem. Supporting Palestine is neither anti-Semitic nor genocidal, even if you sort of ignore the actual history of it. So President Gay, President McGill, and President Kornbluth, they were all appalled by anti-Semitism and took action against it on campus. But asked whether they supported the right of Israel to exist, they answered yes, without equivocation. But they did get pursued by Elise Stefanik, what's interesting always in these kinds of hearings is the question of shaping the call and response to a question. So President McGill replied, if the speech turns into conduct, it can be harassment. Being asked, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Penn's rules or code of conduct, yes or no? Stefanik pressed the issue. I am asking specifically, calling for the genocide of Jews, does that constitute bullying or harassment? And McGill responds, if it's directed and severe and pervasive, it is harassment. So Stefanik responded, so the answer is yes. McGill says, it is a context-dependent decision, Congresswoman. And Stefanik exclaimed, that's your testimony today, calling for the genocide of Jews is depending on the context. Now you can see how this is being spun. And this was the only little soundbite or clip that was being shown. There's a significantly a larger amount of conversation going back and forth, but it was largely Stefanik doing the major questioning. This was not unlike House Resolution 894. You know, Democrats don't really want to step out either in favor or against, and many voted present in the vote on a resolution in terms of the sense of the House. So needless to say, you know, Penn is under fire. And to make it worse, the Board of Advisors to the Wharton Business School are beginning to call for the removal of the president, McGill. She's only been in office a year. It is, of course, a typical kind of thing, considering that they probably have a lot more to do, considering some of their famous alums or infamous alums. And so it does matter to some people because it is a kind of pressure campaign. Wealthy donors, a wealthy donor pulled $100 million gift to the school, citing McGill's appearance in D.C. as a key reason. So you see a lot of political leverage going back and forth by private capital. This is not unusual, and this has been referred to by other folks. You know, a donor to Harvard referred to the Dr. Gay, a black president of the first black president of Harvard University, as a diversity hire, which is an insult that it's very, very at the front end. So it is it's been a difficult week for higher education. I would assert to you that you have to be very careful for the amount of disinformation that's being cranked out on the right wing side on these matters. It is framing it in a way that just seems bizarrely unusual at times, as if a panel of women, all of elite universities, sort of gives you the sense that most institutions have female presidents, and they don't, and it's not 50%. It is unusual in that particular sense, and of course is designed to set forward a particular kind of anti-woke agenda, as we've seen in the administration of other institutions, particularly public institutions. So that's my little rant for today.
You're telling me that this actually happened this week. This wasn't APAC reality television audition week.
No. No, this is pretty weird. It's just weird that, you know, you would pick, of course, Harvard and MIT and Pennsylvania, you know, private institutions, Ivies plus science, you know, the #1 science school. But none of these were the kinds of things you want to go showing to prospective student applicants, for example, nor do you want to show it to prospective donors from a philanthropic point of view. So it is all about bad PR and sort of using elite education and diversity as a whipping person. And particularly, this is the way that the GOP, you know, kind of frames these kinds of things. Claudine Gay, you know, the first Black woman president of Harvard University, she came out and apologized for the statement she made. And this is that moment where, you know, you can't backtrack on this stuff. It's not going to help. there's all kinds of, PR. It's all about PR at this point. Um, but of course, since people are pulling their money, but this is a kind of game. Remember that this is an attempt to leverage certain things to get the university to provide certain things. It's how you get stuff. It's how you get buildings named after you, etc.
Mm.
And but then again, most of us, even those of us with a little experience in higher education, think of it like a Rodney Dangerfield film from the 1980s called Back to School.
Oh, I missed that one.
Oh, it was the second grossing I think comedy of the year, but it's pretty low rent.
Did you make reference to a student? Did a student testify or several students?
The New York Times. Oh, no, they had no students testify. I was just quoting from an article that was framed by this particular hearing, and they had interviewed a student at Harvard who felt uncomfortable because pro-Palestinian demonstrations were, he perceived them as being anti-Semitic as opposed to pro-Palestinian. This is all, it's the false equivalence, thing. And as of yet, no buildings have been burnt. I assume that some people have gotten arrested in a public demonstration. I think a couple of weeks ago, a community college professor who is a Muslim killed a demonstrator, a pro-Israeli demonstrator. So that, you're going to see this framed forward as we move along.
I was going to mention that you do have these students speaking out that feel threatened or say they're experiencing anti-Semitism. But all the while, the majority of attacks and actual killings have been faced by Palestinian Americans. It's outrageous.
Proportionality has left the building. It is just amazing to me.
Weren't students doxxed basically? And I think this guy also said not to hire them.
Yes, this is the campaign is pretty extreme. The doxing campaign. People who hire trucks to put your social media out on the street is pretty extreme. Pretty weird.
Oh, they are posting their faces and names in the trucks.
I'm sorry.
Like, what's the truck campaign? What exactly is that?
Oh, well, you can hire a truck to do like a billboard thing. And so a couple of weeks ago, I think somebody hired a truck to put the contact information of various people on, I don't know, pro-Palestinian committees and a variety of other folks. And, this is just a piece of the whole business here. Someone on the anti-Semitism advisory committee, I think at UPenn, or maybe in Harvard, decided to resign and said, this is the climate's gotten too crazy. So this is just the beginning. I'm sorry to say, it's going to get worse before it gets better.
Well, I think that's about all we've got for tonight.
Let's mention that this evening, in about a half an hour, Twilight Zone, which resembles reality more and more these days.
Followed by that, it looks like we've got Dr. Wombat, Valley Vox will be showing, I just got a message, Kissinger celebration tonight.
Oh, wonderful.
After following the Twilight Zone.
Indeed. Well, that will be amusing. We do other things, and we will make more of them more widely available if you come join us. We do interesting stuff. Weekly Marks is this weekend. I'm going to yammer a little bit about probably value form a bunch of things tomorrow. We have other kinds of events like Colombo on Sunday, a writing workshop on Monday, sports on Monday. We're looking at Mike Davis's book on Tuesday. We're reading Shina Miev book on the Communist Manifesto, Kel Horror on Thursday. So we have a busy week coming up. Movie night will have a little thing about Marx, another not Groucho, but Carl, and you know, it'll all be amusing.
And I'd just like to tell people I'm here every Friday cooking a 100% vegetarian meal. If you've got any requests that you'd like to be made, I'm all ears. Just send a message to me on Discord or come join us at the autonomouscollective.net. You can register for the newsletter, get access to Zoom and Discord. And I'm trying to formulate a allergy-free or a low allergy meal that will appeal to as many people as possible. We'll try to do some radical experimentation with avoiding allergens. Still doing some research on it though. But I'll also be focusing on Middle Eastern food as the Gaza catastrophe goes on, which is a bit awkward. But come join us. See you next week.
See you next week. Thanks for your attention. Bye-bye.
Hit it, James.
Coming. Oh dear. No, I lost.
Lordy.
Right.
That's the autonomous collective.
Yes. .net. Sorry. Keep going.
Fuck it, Lane. Let's do it live.
Yeah, just do it.
Air guitar.
It's not opening for me.
Taking the bridge.